An old coworker had a job at a mental hospital as a security guard, and they had to go in and check the rooms to make sure the patients didn't have anything they could hurt themselves with. As he got to this one room, this nurse told him that the woman inside, who was in her 60s, thinks she has a baby in there with her and it lives in the box. They said to never touch the box and only look in it when she's not looking, and that they'd distract her so he can look inside. Well, they go into her room and she's cradling the box, and he starts checking the sheets and stuff for contraband, while the nurses distract her long enough for him to look in the box. He does, and when he turned around, a piece of gear on his uniform caught the edge of the box and it fell to the ground. The lady heard it and started screaming a blood-curdling scream that he said sounded like a wild animal. Luckily, the nurses grabbed her before she could turn around to see the box. He quickly put it right back in its place, and they tried to assure her it wasn't the box that fell. She continued screaming and pounding on the walls until she looked in the box and saw that her baby was indeed still fine. She then went back to cradling her baby and softly singing to it as they left the room. And no, there was nothing in the box, it was always an empty box. A maximum security prison patient was sent to the facility. I had been doing my psychiatric rotation for medical school at a decent-sized mental state hospital. This patient had been in the prison system since he was 14, in and out until he was 18, when he committed murder and was given a psychiatric diagnosis of schizophrenia. Though all of us severely doubted the diagnosis. He was sent to us because he was too much to handle at the max prison in the state capital due to his psychiatric illness. Essentially, this 37-year-old male was too much for a maximum security prison to handle, and was sent to us to deal with. He spent the first 2 nights with us in solitary confinement in restraints. You could hear him scream obscenities and threats the whole time. It took more than the normal dosage of Haldol to sedate him. Eventually, the psychiatrist on staff went and talked to him and was able to calm him down enough to get him into his room. Within the first 2 days, he had gone to the patient cafeteria and stolen 50+ plastic forks, and had manufactured them all into shivs. His roommate, a docile old man who had been in the hospital for 30 years, told the nurse about it. We confronted him about it and he flipped out. He threatened everyone on the floor, and tried to fight us all, pulling 2 shivs out of his shorts and ripping his shirt off. It took 8 men to hold him down, and we had to again chemically restrain him. As he was falling asleep, he looked at the old man and said, "I'll gut you for this, you rat bitch." He was put in restraints and in confinement. The old man was moved to another floor, and we immediately called the maximum security prison and told them to come pick him up. That he was stable from a psychiatric standpoint and needed to go back as he was a risk to everyone at our facility. The next day, we told him he was leaving to go home, and he became our best patient. He thought with model behavior he'd be allowed to stay because he knew he was the king at the state hospital. He was a model patient until the prison came to get him, and of course, all hell broke loose again. One of the police officers got their nose broken. Needless to say, I decided not to become a psychiatrist. Not me, but one of my aunts. In the 80s, she worked in a mental hospital in Missouri. There was a patient there who had a complete mental break one night and kept saying that demons were trying to get him. I guess one of the nurses thought it was hilarious and taunted him so bad by saying things like, "Ooh, I'm a demon, you better run, I'm gonna get you," while laughing. Well, the guy did run. Right through the window. From the 4th or 5th floor up. Died instantly. My aunt saw the whole thing and she was threatened to keep her mouth shut about it. And the other nurse never got in any trouble. Not a mental hospital, but a prison. As most people are aware, lots and lots of people die in prison from both natural and unnatural causes. The unit I worked in had several people die from natural causes in about a 2-month time frame, and this is where it gets weird. I started working there immediately after this happened, and nobody told me about the deaths. I was working the graveyard shift, so I was assigned to watching 300-ish inmates sleep all night and doing my best to make sure nothing bad happened to them. Well, periodically, people would scream throughout the night or have nightmares or sleepwalk, which was normal for people with traumatic pasts, but every now and then I would hear a blood-curdling scream coming from one of the other dorms. There were 3 dorms, and every time I had heard this scream it had came from dorm A when I was in B or C. When I heard it I would immediately go check on everyone and nothing was ever wrong, but nobody seemed to ever wake up from it, so I assumed it was my sleep-deprived mind playing tricks on me. Finally, one night a few inmates had come back early from their graveyard porter jobs and were just hanging out bullshitting with me at my desk in dorm A when the 4 or so of us that were there all heard the scream. It was crystal clear, coming from the recreation room, which was locked at night so people couldn't turn the TV on. I went and checked it out and nobody was in there and nothing had been moved from the evening prior. At this point I had witnessed this phenomenon, so I knew I wasn't crazy and called for some senior staff to come down there. I told them the story and that I had been hearing this for weeks now but finally had proof. He proceeded to tell me about all the deaths that had happened and how they all happened on a graveyard shift in that specific dorm. Apparently they were all aware of the screaming and other things that had happened in that dorm but were too afraid, so they made me, the new guy, post up there every night. Work around hospitals in IT. Part of a hospital where I occasionally cover has a disused mental health ward that was locked up and shut down, no idea why. IT got the go-ahead to open it up again and use it for equipment storage of old kit, new kit during a refit. I'm down there on my own for a few hours in the evening. It's the middle of winter and it's chuffing freezing as there is no heating, it's been shut off. This ward is large, 2 corridors, around 30 rooms. I got curious. I used my phone flashlight and went down the corridor, flipping light switches on until I walked into a reception-like area on the other side of the ward. It had a double entry system with a secure door, keypad lock, and then an outer door to the outside world with a window in between to identify people and buzz them in. I look around, shrug, and am about to walk back when I hear a bang on the window of the internal security door and nearly have a heart attack when I turn around and there is some bloke standing there, smiling like a maniac, holding a key. I stood stock still for a minute, assessing if he was going to try and break in and kill me, when he shouted through the glass. "I've got an appointment. I've got an appointment." This is at 7 p.m. on a freezing January night. Turns out, he was a previous patient and had been moved to secure residences not far away, but on his trip to the doctors had escaped and reverted back to previous habits. He had stolen a key from the ward before it shut down and nobody had thought to change the outdoor locks. Luckily, the deadbolt to the security door held. He was a big guy, 6 foot odd and very overweight. Despite being a big guy myself, I doubt I could have stopped him from breaking in if he really wanted in. I was a pharmacy technician at a hospital with a psych ward for some time. We would have to go around with a cart and dispense the patient's medications, and being a 5 feet 2 inches girl, a security guard or male nurse would accompany me, just as a precaution. I never had any real issues other than the occasional death grip onto my arm or manic outbursts, but there was one boy who was entirely different. His chart said he was 9 and he had pale skin, dark hair, and huge bright, green eyes. He always greeted me in the most polite way, asked how I was doing, and always found something different to compliment me on every time. He was extremely well-spoken and mature for his age, so I began looking forward to seeing him, as normal small talk is definitely cherished in that setting. If he saw me outside of his room in the halls, he made sure to say hello and always called me Miss Jones or Ma'am. One day, a couple of our female nurses saw me pause to chat with him in the hallway and waved me over to ask if I was out of my mind. Apparently, when he was in kindergarten, he grew an intense attachment to his young female teacher. This escalated to the point of him calling her Mom and leaving notes for her about how he wished he were her son. He had a normal home life with both parents, and the teacher tried to explain to him that she couldn't be his mom because that would hurt his real mother's feelings, and that she already had that job covered. So, he went home and killed his own mother in her sleep by cutting her throat, so his teacher could be his mom. The female staff had a general rule of not interacting with him excessively to prevent any kind of attachment from forming. So, don't judge a book by its cover, I guess. Once, a fellow female patient told me she found writings under her bed. They were just old, small wooden bed frames with hard mattresses that would make all kinds of noises when you rolled over, but I still wondered what exactly she was doing lying under her bed to find these writings. When she first told me, I thought it was a joke. But sure enough, one day during the group we managed to sneak away, and she showed me. Indeed, there were stories written under her bed. After that, we had everyone check under their own beds, and there was more writing under every single bed. They were stories of patients who had stayed here before, or ways they were planning on killing themselves, or who the good and bad nurses were. It creeped me out. As a tech in psych years ago, there was a 7-year-old kid sent to the floor because the mom didn't know what to do with him. Sadly, common things happen, even if the kids don't have psych issues. Anyway, the mom was shaking and crying, and they had to take the kid into another room. She was genuinely afraid of her own son. She had suspected something was wrong when she kept finding mutilated animals in the backyard, but never heard or saw coyotes or anything around. The neighbor's smaller pets started disappearing. The boy had an obsession with knives, hiding them around the house, denying anything when the mom confronted him. Then, when the two started getting into arguments, he would get really violent and hit her, push her down and kick her, threaten to kill her. On multiple occasions she woke up in the middle of the night with him standing beside her bed, staring her in the face. She put extra locks on her bedroom door to feel safe while she slept. The last straw was when she lifted up his mattress and found 50+ knives of all shapes and sizes under there. So she brought him to us. I remember talking to him, treating him like he was just any other kid that came through. He seemed remarkably normal, until you spoke directly to him. He had this way of looking right through you, or maybe like he didn't see you at all while you were speaking. He would respond like a robot, like he was just saying words because that's what we wanted to hear. And he would always put on this creepy, dead-looking smile. Like all mouth and no eye involvement in the smile. Especially when he would get away with something, like taking another kid's markers and they couldn't figure it out. Still gives me chills laying here thinking about him. I believe I met a 7-year-old psychopath. Nothing I can say can possibly describe the year I worked in psychiatric intensive care. Creepy isn't the thing that comes to mind when I think back on it. More heartbreaking and horrifying. But creepiness was a part of it. Especially evening and night shifts, naturally. There is always something disturbing about watching someone while they hallucinate. You can tell it is 100% real to them, and something about that makes you believe it, on some level. A lot of stories end with, and of course, I had to look over my shoulder to make sure. You see the emotions it brings out. There was a woman that came in and sat down across the table from me for her admission interview. She had bandages all over her arms and scotch tape over her mouth and ears. She looked very uncomfortable and wouldn't really sit still. When the nurse would ask her a question, she would peel the corner of the tape back and answer, then stick the tape back on really fast. We eventually found out that she saw and felt bugs crawling all over her, and they were trying to get inside her body. The tape was to keep the bugs out. The bandages were because some bugs got in and she had to dig them out. She couldn't sit still because she felt the bugs all over her even while we sat and talked. The worst part was, she had some idea that it was her mind playing tricks on her. Can you imagine going through your life, feeling like someone is continuously dumping buckets of cockroaches on your head, feeling like they're all over you and getting inside of you to the point that you're digging chunks out of your flesh in a panic, all while knowing intellectually that none of it is real? I had a dementia patient, among other things I imagine, but I was just the nursing assistant. I don't get much for patient histories, just whether they can walk unassisted or poo on their own. She was a very kind, sweet old lady. She thought of herself as a young mother, so she carried a doll with her, wrapped in a blanket. She was even allowed a baby bed, and every night she would tuck her baby in beside her bed. Then she would talk about the baby growing inside her belly. She would go on very coherently about her pregnancy and her child. She had me believing she lived in this sweet fantasy land that was set on repeat. But it would all abruptly end and start over once her baby was due and there was no new baby. She would mope for about a month, super depressed, not eating, non-stop crying. She could not be consoled. She'd get fairly violent. Then it would start over. She'd just wake up one morning and as happy as could be. Did you hear the great news? I'm going to have another baby. One night she got all tucked in and forgot to tuck her baby in. I noticed and said, I can tuck Susan in for the night, and reached in to get her baby. The woman throat punched me hard. I dropped the baby doll when I fell over gasping for air. She then started to lose it as she was trying to further assault me, yelling at me about driving too fast and destroying everything she loved. Once the dust settled, it was shared with me that she was pregnant once upon a time, and she already had a 1-year-old. The husband and the 1-year-old got in an accident on the way to the hospital. They both died. She was so distraught over it she gave the newborn up for adoption. That's why her delusions start over after the due date and she is so mad in between. I imagine some residual guilt, anger for her loss is what caused her to throat punch me for taking her doll. When I first started working there, I just thought she was some fun old delusional lady. I never expected the delusions to have backstories. It's heartbreaking. Dementia seems terrifying enough when it's described as being confused or losing your mind, but it seems so much worse when it's repeat your worst life experience over and over until you die. To constantly be stuck in the time leading up to your most traumatic experience and reliving it over and over. The very definition of hell, in my opinion. Brain damage can be absolutely horrific. Broken humans that don't work anymore and nobody knows what to do with them. There was one guy who had brain damage from infant meningitis. The guy is about 40 to 50 years old now, but he's exactly like what you might imagine a lobotomized person to look like. Totally vacant staring eyes, jaw hanging down with a continuous thread of dribble rolling off his bottom lip. Arms hanging down by his sides. And all he does is pace up and down whatever room he is in, all day and all night, until he collapses asleep after about 4 to 5 days, sleeps 12 hours, wakes up and resumes pacing. He wears an adult nappy diaper because he is totally incontinent, and changing it is remarkably difficult because he won't stop pacing even while people are trying to clean him up. He cannot eat by himself. He cannot do anything by himself. The only verbal speech he produces is a loud gu-gu-gu, like a propeller engine starting up. There's nothing there in his mind, at all. He's a husk. He never smiles, never frowns, gives no indication of any aspiration or want. That has been his entire life. He has no purpose, has required 24-hour care his entire life, and I don't think there's a single person who has ever worked with him that wouldn't have gladly taken him outside and shot him in the head if they were allowed to. Anybody opposed to euthanasia hasn't seen real brain damage. Anyone who can't understand why doctors give up trying to resuscitate after a certain point where irreversible brain damage has occurred have not seen real brain damage. Anyone upset about the doctors ending Charlie Gard's life haven't seen real brain damage. They should transport the guy the first described between hospitals to show family members what the doctors are talking about when they say that a person should be allowed to die.